In this video, I'm going to be taking a look at Rokinon's SP 35mm F1.2 premium manual focus lens. Now, of course, this is also known as the Samyang XP series, and again, it's their premium manual focus still photography lens. Now, ever since these lenses came out, I have been secretly curious about them as they relate to video work because, again, they're manual focus, all metal construction, supposed to be their premium line. And to be honest, I've been able to find not a whole lot of relevant information, especially when it comes to motion work. So that's the purpose of this review, to investigate this. And to get an idea of some of the characteristics of this lens, let's start taking a look at some of the tests, starting with bokeh. Let's look at bokeh first, and as we go to close focus, we see our lights, they're getting nice and round in the center. You know, on the edges, we do have a little bit of ovalization, cat's eyes, and not quite even. Now, as soon as we stop down to a 2, we definitely get some of the geometric patterns on the Bokeh, and 2.8, it is, of course, a little more distinct. And at an F4, the trend continues, although the pattern size of the Bokeh is even across the frame. We're at 5.6. Now let's look at it at an F8, and the pattern remains the same. As we look at ghosting flare, we do see that large kind of rainbow flare wide open at a 1.2. The other ghosting, the typical ghosting flares, the planets in the solar system, is not very distinct though. And at an F2, that big outer flare, the rainbow one, kind of becomes distinct, but it's definitely been pushed out. And our planets, typical ghosting flare, they are, slightly more distinct. As we stop down the lens, typically I've noticed the planets do become a little more distinct, those orbs. And the larger flare continues to get pushed out as we stop down and less distinct. Here we are at a 4. And once we go to a 5.6, we're starting to get the star-shaped pattern with the head unit, with the lights. And it continues, the star-shaped pattern gets a little more distinct at an F8, and the planets also get a little more distinct as we stop down, but pretty good flare control. Now when we look at veiling flare, let's look wide open, and we can see this lens is doing an excellent job of controlling veiling flare wide open at an F1.2. And as we go to F2, it's slightly worse. Again, typical experience that I've had. As we slowly close down the lens, many lenses, the veiling flare does become slightly more, let's just say, problematic. Here we are at an F4, but again, this lens is controlling this particular type of flare very well. What we would expect from a modern lens. And an F8, here we go. Again, not bad. Really, really good control on veiling flare. Now let's take a look at breathing. Now in this shot, I'm looking at the roof line and the sky, and of course the window on the lower left-hand side. As we go from near to far, we want to see again if there's a shift in the image or a change in the magnification of the image. Now when we go to the chart, we're looking at the same thing, and we're looking to see if the squares are actually changing in size, and they are. There is, we can see here some breathing as the size of the squares does change. And looking at the chart for distortion, yeah, we could definitely see a little bit of barrel distortion on this lens. And I will check for some chromatic aberration, and as we zoom in, we do see a little bit of that green on the right-hand side. And as we zoom past, we do see a little bit of purple, a little purple fringing at wide open. Now we go to an F2. It's still there, definitely still there, but definitely not as intense. It definitely got a little bit better at an F2. We go to an F4, much better at an F4, and the purple was, very, very slight if I saw anything at all. Now with this test, we're going to check for relative sharpness across the frame. So let's zoom in, we'll do this in post, and then go all the way over to the right-hand side. It's pretty close, maybe dropped off a little bit, same with the left-hand side. Fairly even. Now we'll punch out and then go to the lower right-hand corner. Again, does drop off a little bit of CA, but not terrible. Same thing with the top left corner. I think we do get a little bit of CA poking through. And as we zoom out, we can definitely tell that wide open, this lens does vignette a little bit, as you can see here. And at a T4, we can immediately see the vignette clears up. Let's punch in. We get an idea of sharpness. Go all the way to the right. Not bad. Let's go all the way to the left. And again, same as the right. So let's pull out and go to the bottom right corner. And again, really not bad. I think some of that CA is starting to clear up a little bit too. Top left. Again, CA is getting a little bit better. The sharpness is also getting better across the field. And as we get to a T8, the sharpness, as we punch in, let's go all the way to the right. We can see it's pretty even all the way to the left across the frame. And now we'll take a look at the bottom right once more time. Not bad. And let's go to the top left. We'll take a look at the top left right now. Okay, so as we would expect at T8, focus is pretty even, sharpness is pretty even across the frame. As far as build quality goes, this lens feels quite substantial, both in build quality, size, and weight, as you can see. You know, it has all metal construction, and it does of course focus internally, so there's no tromboning, which is of course a great thing on manual focus lenses, especially still lenses that we want to use for motion work. The focus is very smooth. It's pretty well dampened also, I should have to say, and it feels like it has about 180-degree focus throw. Now, there's no iris ring. You do control the iris through the camera, through the contacts, and we'll say that the A7S III, you know, with the Metabones 4 adapter, the iris control worked fine. Absolutely no problems with this lens. Now, the point of interest to me on this series is that the primary focal lengths, the 35, 50, and 85, they are all f1.2s, you know, big wide lens. Now, the standard Samyang manual focus lenses, both in the still photo style and the cinema style, they have a f1.4 or a t1.5. So this is, you know, at a 1.2, a different design, and you know, it gives us options as long as it's sharp, and this lens is pretty sharp at a wide open at f1.2. It gives us options on the look. Now, from the tests, I was able to determine that the focus plane or the sharpness flatness across the frame is not bad wide open. I mean, I thought it dropped off just a little bit in the corners, but you know what? Not nearly as much as some of the other manual focus lenses I've been testing lately. As far as vignetting goes, you know, this does have a bit of vignetting wide open. By the time you get to a 2.8 or 4, it does seem to even out a bit with exposure in terms of vignetting. And as far as flare control, this is a very modern lens. As we saw, especially with the veiling flare test, that this lens controls flare. It does a great job controlling flare, and also with the ghosting flare. You know, the ghosting flare was fairly minimal, I thought, you know, for a lens. Now, if there is a distraction for me with this particular lens, and that probably had to do with distortion, and that was in the breathing test when I was outside pointing at the back of the house. I could clearly see, you know, the lines were not horizontal on that particular test. Now, if I backed up a little bit, they would, of course, looked a little straighter. But, you know, distortion was a little higher than expected. Now, and it's still, of course, it's so easy to correct for that distortion, both in Lightroom and other programs. And a lot of cameras, can correct for distortion in camera. But for me, you know, with motion work, it's a little more complicated to correct for that distortion, you know, on a moving frame. You know, the other distraction for me with this series is that it's a little limited in focal lengths. In other words, we go from a 35 all the way down to a 14 mil. There's no 25 or, you know, 21 to 28 millimeter focal length in between, just 35 to 14. Then, of course, they have a 10 millimeter, a super wide 10 millimeter that they say is rectilinear. That would actually be a really interesting lens to test. Just on its own, like at 10 mil, is that really, you know, a rectilinear lens? I'd really like to know. Now, on the other end, this series does stop at an 85. It does not go to 135. So that's a slight distraction. Realistically, you could get one of the VDSLR Mark II lenses, you know, the 25 to 135 focal lengths to fill out a set. But this particular set is missing those focal lengths, especially, you know, when it comes to you know, to motion work, we like to have, you know, a matched set of lenses. But other than that, this is an interesting option. You know, definitely an interesting option. It's something to keep an eye on. Well, I hope this test was helpful, and we'll see you on the next one.